BBC News School Report.
I'm Kitty.
And I'm Ewan.
And we're from Cardinal Newman Catholic School in Hove.
Coming up,
the Oscar-winning King's Speech helped people with a stammer to find their voice. We have an exclusive interview with the pop star Gareth Gates.
The explorers who battle crime and deadly diseases to teach the world about global warming.
Teenagers and alcohol. Is the problem as bad as we think?
Olympic fever hits Brighton. We go to the beach to play volleyball.
And we turn the table on our teachers by making them reveal their best and worst school reports. The film, The King's Speech, has captured the imagination of people around the world.
It's based on the true story of King George VI, who had a stammer and overcame it.
The film has picked up a host of awards, winning 4 Oscars and 7 BAFTAs.
It's also made stammering cool, according to the West End musical star Gareth Gates, who's had a stammer since he was a child.
Tim and David went to meet Gareth for an exclusive interview.
In 3, 2, 1. Good.
With a huge success of the King's Speech, we were inspired to meet a famous person who has a stammer.
We were invited by Gareth Gates to come to London to his home to discuss his experiences with it.
Oh, my love, my darling, I've hungered for your touch.
Hi there. Nice to meet you. Nice to meet you. Sit down.
Tim and I both have, we both pinpointed the moments in our lives when we began to stammer. Could you tell us about your sort of first realisation that you had a stammer?
Sure, I had a stammer all my life, and I can't remember how or when it started. Things got worse as I got older, I think. And I think when it really sort of hit me, I was about 8 or 9, and being bullied at school was very hard for me. Fortunately, I had my music, and I was never able to express myself through speech, and so I think that's why I excelled so much in my music, because that was my only form of expression.
Are you still mine?
Looking back on the experience of Pop Idol, I surprise you how much success you've had.
Yes, I never expected to have as much success as what I've had. However, I've sort of worked hard at it. My speech as well, I've had to work hard at that. I'm now able to sort of act on stage and handle interviews like this, which is something that I've never been able to do in the past.
Stammering's been seen as a taboo subject, and do you think the King's Speech has sort of inspired people to do something about it and to help other people?
Yeah, I think anything that raises the awareness of stammering helps stammerers. When I was a child at school, I'd never met another stammerer, and so it was a very lonely place. Most of my interviews I mention stammering, simply because if there is people out there with a stammer, at least they can relate to someone or something. And so the films really heightened the awareness, which is wonderful. And stammering seemed to be cool now. 3, 2, 1. We'll breathe, we'll hit the sound and release.
Duh! Good. After the chat, Gareth showed us some of his breathing exercises.
It was a fantastic experience meeting Gareth.
And learning how he deals with his stammer in his everyday life.
This is David.
And this is Tim.
Reporting for BBC News School Report.
On last year's school report, we spoke to 3 brave explorers about Atlantic Rising, their ambitious project to raise awareness of rising sea levels.
The team spent several months travelling around the Atlantic, visiting schools and villages.
They spread the word about global warming.
15 months ago, the Atlantic Rising team travelled around the Atlantic coast to see the rising change in sea level.
Last time we caught up with the Atlantic Rising team, they were in Brazil. Since then, they've travelled all the way up the southern, through the central and up into the northern coast of America before travelling all the way back to England for last Christmas.
Today we are fortunate enough to have one of the members of the team with us, who we're going to speak to now.
The team lived and worked out of their vehicle, visiting schools, speaking with scientists and launching education projects.
I'm alright, I'm a bit tired. It has. It's been 15 months. Let's sit.
So Will, last time we spoke to you, you were in Brazil and you were just about to drop off the buoy, and you were about halfway through your expedition. And now your expedition was 15 months long, and that's a really long time.
Yeah, it is. And I don't think we quite expected how long 15 months would be. And after we left you, we actually travelled up around the coast of Brazil and all the way up the Amazon, which was perhaps the sort of most dangerous point for us. We got robbed. Lynn contracted dengue fever, which almost killed her. But we made it through, and then we went further up, right the way up to America, and then finally getting back to the UK. So, yeah, you caught us just before things got tough, but we made it back, and yeah, it's very nice to be back. So we dropped the buoy off, and it floated about 1,000 miles across the ocean, and eventually was picked up by some fishermen in Brazil. They saw it floating next to their boat, and they picked it up. They thought it was a bomb. So they took it to the shore, and finally somebody from a hotel found it, and we were able to track where the buoy was using our satellite tracker, which was in the buoy, and drove up and picked it up. It wasn't a bomb, and so we managed to pick it up, and we actually launched it again when we were coming back across the ocean from America to the UK. And even in America, we saw some communities that were most at risk from sea level rise. In the Mississippi Delta, we were working with people whose land is sinking at the same time as the sea levels are rising. So within the next 100 years, the land itself will sink 4 foot and sea levels will rise by 3 foot. And so these are people who are in a really sort of desperate state. You know, a lot of the time when we think about sea level rise, we think about vulnerable communities in, say, Bangladesh or the Pacific, but even in America, you've got people who are just unable to protect themselves from rising sea levels.
Because this is all going on in, say, the other side of the world to us, and how does this affect us, and have we got any calls, or has this related to anything we do in Britain?
Well, completely. One thing we realised is that climate change it's an international issue. Carbon dioxide, it doesn't obey national borders, and therefore any effect that we have on the atmosphere here has a profound effect upon other parts of the Atlantic Ocean. And so when people look at other parts of the world and they think, oh, that's thousands of miles away from me, actually we have an effect upon those areas through our own carbon emissions, through the decisions that we make in our everyday lives. So we all have a responsibility to do something about this.
So we've seen how global warming is affecting the Atlantic region, but what about the polar region?
We're going to head up now and talk to Mark Wood, who is a polar expert who's had first-hand experience on the climate change in the polar region.
Hello.
Hello!
Hello.
Can you tell us some of the evidence you've collected in places like Svalbard to suggest that climate change is happening now?
Yeah, sure. I mainly work in the Canadian High Arctic, which is quite good really for your question, because I work closely with the Inuit people. Now for me to give precise data on climate change issues would be wrong really, so I've only operated 8 years within the area. But what I've taken from the Inuit people, which is important, is how the seasons are changing. So if you think of it like the farmers in the UK, they're affected by seasons. So if they have a cold summer, then the crops are affected. It's exactly the same as the Inuit people who live in these extreme areas. So that's the first thing. The second thing is, this is going to be controversial for you, but I spoke to an Inuit hunter a few years ago about climate change as we were filming out there, the people who live there, and he said to me, everybody outside of the Arctic Circle thinks it's all about the polar bear. They think the polar bear is going to suffer. And what about the people itself? The people there are going to be more affected by it than the animals, because they will kind of adapt, if you like, even though they are sort of part of the problem as well. And just with that, I think the polar bear is a symbol of the Arctic, so it should still be looked at. With regards to the last thing I'll say about the climate change in the area, the routes that we usually take on expedition, have changed because there have been open water areas been created a lot earlier on in the season. So we've had to sort of navigate across land rather than going across sea ice because that's sort of been melting quickly. Does that help? Does that answer your question?
Yeah, that's great, thank you. And in organisations like Education Through Exploration and Atlantic Rising, do you think they play an important role in educating people like ourselves and the students there, in particular in climate change?
No, I think my job as an explorer, if you like, has a massive role within education now, because you can have great teachers such in this school teaching about climate change, but to actually have people on the ground who are living it on expedition to then communicate with classrooms as we're doing now is extremely important. It puts an edge of realism there for the issue itself. So both organisations and expeditions that you mentioned are extremely important to how we put the message across.
Our world is becoming increasingly smaller and interconnected as projects like Atlantic Rising and Education Through Exploration show.
They are raising awareness for issues impacting our Earth, such as climate change and sea level rise.
We're the ones who are going to inherit the Earth. It's up to us. This is Louis,
Kitty,
George, Joe,
and Beth.
reporting from Cardinal Newman Catholic School for BBC News School Report.